Hi, my name is Leslie Smith with Property Quest Realty, and I'm back. Today I want to talk about how ownership really isn't optional. I believe that real estate equals real power, and especially for Black families. I really believe that home ownership changes lives. I think we all know that there's been pretty long history in our country that people that look like this could not buy a home. Being a woman of color, we couldn't buy a home. So I kind of understand when people say, I'd rather rent. And to me, I have to go back to think about our ancestors, how they fought, they died, they dreamt of a time when they could own anything and not be owned themselves. The fact that they built things, they built some of the houses that, I probably own because some of these houses we own are old, that they built it, but they couldn't own it. So I do think sometimes it's a disservice to our ancestors if we say, I know that this is something you wanted to do, and I have every opportunity to do it, but I choose not to. I just personally think it's a disservice. I think that ownership has given the people in this country who could own property, the only people who could own property at one time was white men, period. It has given them a power that we are still trying to get to that point in this country to attain. So to me, that's why ownership equals power. You have a say in building your communities. You have a say in your school system. You have a say in the businesses that are around you. When you don't own, you lose some of that power. So I think home ownership is more about, it's not as much about having the flex of owning a home, but it's really about honoring the generations of people who could never have owned it, who look like us, who died for us. They could have never done it. So I just always feel it's a disservice, but more importantly, because it gives us power. It gives us the power to be able to really shape the world around us. So how has being a homeowner really impacted my life? And I'm not even going to talk about being an investor, but being a homeowner. It was probably 2003 that I was laid off from Bell South and I wanted to start a clothing store. I didn't have the capital just laying around. Because we owned a home, we were able to use the equity in that home to actually to secure a loan for me to be able to start that clothing store. If I was renting, that would not have been an option. It still would have just been a dream. So that's one example of how it has personally affected my life. I also think about, I've seen people, I actually have some renters, some tenants who have rented all of their life. And I mean 30 to 40 years. And when they retire and they realize that they have more life left than they actually have retirement money, that they can't even afford to pay for the basic necessities to, number one, keep them going or to keep them healthy. I've seen people who own homes be able to sell that property for them to be able to put their loved ones in a nursing facility. So for an example, I have friends, their parents are aging. So their parents are 80 and 90 years old. And because they own property, they're able to do a reverse mortgage that they can then put their loved one in a nursing home. If you don't have that equity, and if you're really relying on the family, and I've seen this, family members to come in and to take care of someone who has worked all of their lives, but they can't even to continue to sustain themselves. So to me, that's what wealth is. I know people always want to talk about, keeping a house in the legacy and always owning it. Sometimes you need the equity from that home to even keep that person who has worked for that home and paid for that home, that mortgage for 30 years, to be able to sustain themselves. So that is the impact of real estate. So here's like a real life example of how home ownership can actually change people's lives. I was raised in Pontchartrain Park, and I'm really proud of that. Pontchartrain Park is a historic neighborhood here in New Orleans. It was a place for a lot of soldiers who were coming back from Vietnam War, like I said, there was a time where, we could only purchase properties in certain areas. And this community was kind of made for middle class at that time, middle class Black Americans to build homes. And the neighborhood is still sustained. We had a college right there. We had Southern University at New Orleans. We had a golf course. It was really built after some houses that were in Mandeville and Covington with that whole concept. So fast forward years later, there's this program with the city of New Orleans, the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority, NORA, where there was this program that you could purchase a lot for a vacant lot for a small amount. And there were some very strict criteria for builders. So we had to write a proposal, and I wrote the proposal about the type of home I would build. And the whole point of this was that you're not just building a home and at a lower cost for the land, but you're building it for someone who would not normally be able to afford land in that area, to afford a home in that area. So we built this home. And like I said, the criteria was very strenuous. More houses in this area don't even have to go through these standards. It had to be fully energy efficient. So that's even more than just the appliances. It had to have a fortified roof, which during that time, this was about 4 years ago, fortified roof was not even a thing that everybody knew about like it is now. It had to have stormwater systems that were designed to prevent the storms, the water from coming in case there was another event like what happened during Hurricane Katrina. So there were a couple of builders who were actually awarded one, and Property Quest was one of them. So we built a home in Pontchartrain Park. We had it appraised. It was appraised at like $275,000. But remember, this has to be a lower income person. So as we were going through the building process, I met this young lady. Don't even remember how I met her, a friend of a friend. She actually qualified, and she actually was really working with that program, but she just couldn't find one of the houses to buy. There was only like maybe 10 houses, and she got outbid each and every time. So I met her, and she had 2 children. She was a young lady. She worked every day. But because she was a single woman, she had an okay job, but because she had those 2 children, it actually qualified her to be considered in that lower income, I'm sorry. So as I'm building this house, I kept saying, well, I'm not ready yet. I don't want to take an offer yet. It's just not time. And I'll never forget this. Her daughter got out the car, and her daughter had these 2 little Afro puffs, and she got out the car and she was crying because her brother did her something. And I looked at this little girl and I was like, that is me when I was 8 years old. And I thought about the impact that Pontchartrain Park and me growing up in that area actually made on me. I was surrounded. I never thought that I couldn't do anything. And it was really because of the area I was surrounded with. We had an architect who lived across the street. We had my best friend's father was, believe it or not, the HR director back in, the early 1970s. And these were all Black families. He was the HR director. He was actually allowing a lot of the young people in that area at the time their first jobs at Krause. So I never ever thought that I couldn't be anything because I was surrounded by people who were doing things. So when I saw this little girl get out the car with the Afro puffs, I immediately, because of course I had Afro puffs, so I immediately thought about myself and thought about the opportunity that this young girl could have in growing up. In that particular neighborhood where we built the house across the street, the owner was the head coach of University of New Orleans basketball team. The person right next door was a big wig at the HDLC in the city of New Orleans. So I just knew that besides her immediate family, her mother who loved her, I even met her grandparents who would always take care of her. I thought about that this young girl would have the opportunity to grow up with these people around her. So she would always know, not just that I have a house and I always have a place to go, but I have people around me that look like me, that talk like me, that are in this area. I can do absolutely anything. So to me, owning a home is more than about just the house. It's the community. And that community really shaped who I am today. Every neighbor on that street poured into me some kind of way, whether it was babysitting me when my mother was at work, my mother and father was at work, or just looking at their careers like, Mr. Williams is an architect? These people down the street are principals. Like my principal lived down the street from me. And I always thought principals and teachers were just like the richest, most wealthiest people at the time because they dressed really nice. Not so much today, but at the time they were just like dressing really nice. So that impact of that little girl getting out the car, I knew that's who I wanted to buy that house. I wanted that mother to be able to raise her daughter specifically. I mean, she had a son also who was the cutest little guy also, but I wanted that family to be able to have the same advantages that I did. And that's really more than what the house could appraise for. That is what that little child, those little children could really bring to this world. So really, homeownership is way more than the wealth that you're bringing in financial terms, but the wealth that you're bringing to a live human being who's looking for some guidance. That's my take on how real estate equals real power in this country. And I hope the message that I got across to you is that it's not always about wealth in the monetary sense, but it's really about shaping communities, shaping the futures of our legacies. Our legacies aren't always our grandchildren. Our legacies are those in the community who are just looking at us. You know, they may not even know our names, but they're looking at us as an example. So to me, building that community by owning a home in that community, that's really where our leverage lies. That's really where our power lies. So once again, thank you for joining me. This is Leslie Smith with Property Quest Realty, and I really hope that you join me again in the next episode.